Hey, what's going on everybody, Blaze4 here, and today I for you guys another video of Persona 5X here. And inside of this video, I have to straight up say it. Y'all see the title and man, this is going to be a first for me. I normally don't do weapon tier lists, seeing that as a disclaimer, this literally helps every last weapon do help their actual character counterparts here. So no matter what's going to happen, these weapons are going to be helpful for their characters. So this one was very interesting. I had to ask a bunch of high ranked players here. I had to get some intake on a lot of different players' opinions, and finally I sat down with a couple of the high rankers as well as very knowledgeable people, and we finally came to a consensus on a little bit of a tier list here. So this is mainly going to be a tier list revolving all of these 5-star weapons, whether they are must-haves, very helpful. 4 stars are perfectly fine for the character, or either they're just do not pulls. Now this was very difficult to do. I'm not even gonna lie, I made this just for all of global and TW together. That's how much of it was kind of a little bit overwhelming, and I'm gonna try and at least have a description of every last one except for the do not pull section. I'm gonna throw them in there immediately. You guys are gonna see exactly who they are, and I'm gonna explain somewhat why they're there, but everything else is gonna have a thorough explanation. It's gonna be a very long video, so I do apologize for this, but I'll try to summarize it up as fast as possible. But if you guys enjoy it, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share it around. This is going to be a very long one, and hopefully it's very helpful for you guys who are considering what you decide to pull for and what you decide not to. But on the screen, you guys should see the tier list here. Now, as I did say earlier, the tiers are going to be must-have weapons, aka the ones who are just above and beyond. They really differ from their 4-star counterparts, so it's better to get the 5-star weapon. Then you're going to have the very helpful, where it's most likely incentivized to get that said 5-star weapon, seeing how good it is compared to the 4-star weapon, but it isn't like a mandatory pull. Then we have the helpful section, where it's pretty nice to have. You're in that middle section. You can go either way with the 5-star or 4-star. Really doesn't matter, just the 5-star is pretty dang useful for the character. Then we have the 4-star is fine section, which just as the actual name incurs, it is going to be perfectly fine to use the 4-star instead of the 5-star weapon. And then we have the do not pull selection. These are going to be just the characters, or at least the weapons, that are just not good for them, mainly because not only is the weapon not too good, but also the character is just not used whatsoever. So there's no point in utilizing the 4-star, or I mean the 5-star, at any point of this entire gaming session. So we're gonna go ahead and get this all laid out here. Hopefully you guys can understand it. The best way I can say how we ended up doing this is it was mainly as useful as possible to the character themselves, not comparing them with the other 5 stars and such like that. No. Just mainly like a difference between the 4-star and 5-star and how it affects the characters themselves, kind of like a ranking order for that specific character. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the do not pull section, and immediately you guys are gonna see exactly why. Lafel, Scloser, and Key. All 3 of these characters, just when it comes down to their 4-star weapons, or at least their 5-star weapons, are not good. To be honest, they're just there. They don't need to be useful whatsoever. To give a good example exactly how this does work, for Key, for example, his 5-star weapon mainly increases his HP scaling, which is really nice, and it does inflict a burn, but that's about it. It's just for 2 whole turns, and as a debuffer, that's all he's giving. It's just inflicting the burn here. You get that increased damage taken, but it's not really too useful. The 4-star weapon as itself actually is only 6% behind on the HP side, so that's automatically ruling out the 5-star weapon HP wise. And then the main thing that we're looking for, aka the Sacred Flame damage, which is the debuff that you're applying, is all we care about. We get that extra percentage that we get on the 64% for the 4-star with his 4-star weapon, while the 5%, or at least the 5-star, mainly gives more of a increased damage taken and more or less increase in his own damage, but doesn't really help out the entire team as a whole. Hence the reason why I say it's just not worth pulling the weapon itself. And since we don't use the character, it makes it even more sudden that you don't just pull this weapon. The other 2 pretty much follow the same lining, so they're going to stay in the do not pull section. As for the next one, which is the 4-star is fine section, this is where we're going to break down every last character. This is where things are going to get a little bit long, so hang in there with me. So for the first character that we're going to go ahead and talk about is going to be Yukari. Yukari is an absolutely amazing character. The only downside with her is her 5-star is really good, but really you don't need everything that it offers. More often than less, you can deal with just a 4-star weapon because it increases her attack by 24%, much like her 5-star increases it by 30% here, being only a 6% difference. The only difference that the 5-star does have is it helps out more with at least what's it called, giving you that extra healing amount, which you really don't need, and it also does give you a damage dealt increase with the 5-star. Well, the 4-star itself, seeing that this character is meant really just to give you a ton of healing, as well as she already applies the buffs on herself anyway and her team anyways, you really just need the healing. That's it. The 4-star does more than enough to do so, and the 5-star is more or less just giving you a little bit something extra. It is pretty nice to have it, but more often than not, you're very fine with just utilizing the 4-star weapon. Hence the reason that she's going to be down in this tier. Doesn't make her bad or anything. Definitely the 5-star weapon is really nice, but the 4-star weapon does keep her covered more than enough. Now for the next character that is going to be joining this spot here, this is going to be Summer Moko. Now Summer Moko is a really good character here, but much like of course our other healer, she falls in this same line. The main reason for this is just because as healers just need to be used here is we only care about the heals. We don't really care about anything else that really evolves them here, and that is going to be the same way with Moko. More often than not, of course, with Moko, how she does scale is based on that healing effect, and that's all we get from at least the 5-star weapon. We get increased on that healing effect, which does help us out, and then we also get a skill damage up from the 5-star weapon itself. But more often than not, we're not looking for any of that. We're looking for the attack percentage, which her 4-star does provide, helping out her healing scaling ability, while also allowing her to trigger Brilliant Fireworks, which is her follow-up attack, and this allows you to then heal yourself even more so and heal your team even more so by a 24.8% amount. This lasts for 2 whole turns and is more than enough for at least the 4-star, so there really isn't a need for the 5-star amount unless you just really want that extra overheal, which I mean, some people really do want that. You would get the 5-star, but more often than not, you can be just fine with just the 4-star. Now for the next character that we're going to be going ahead and going over, this is more or less going to be a older character, being Okayann. Now Okayann is another character that is absolutely nice. She does some nice things for her whole entire team. The only thing with her is her 5-star is just not it's not necessary, if I have to say it like this. It does help you out quite a lot with the at least buffs that it does apply on you, as well as the attack increase, but we're actually only 6% behind on the attack increase itself. And afterwards, with the actual 4-star that we do have here, we're actually able to apply a support skill by at least 82% if I remember correctly, to gain 1 whole beat stack. With this in mind, it's now a higher chance of getting that beat that she really does need for her whole actual kit, and that's more than enough. The 5-star itself, we already know we're going to have the beats in stack, and then we have a 41% chance of pulsing rhythm to give it to us as well, but there's no real need for us to have it. In fact, it's more or less just there, and seeing that the usage rate of this character in the future is just not going to be used too often, it doesn't really affect too much when it comes down to the weapons themselves. The difference, at least the differences between both of them, isn't major. So I mean, like between both of them in general, the 4-star is perfectly fine utilizing instead of actually just going ahead and going for the 5-star. But of course you can use either one. Now our next character that we're going to be going over, this is going to be Rin. Now Rin is in this degree because absolutely with her, I originally thought that she really needed her 5-star weapon to really work. As time went on, when of course TW was a thing here, well, I guess when TW was still early in, she more or less started to at least be like a character that we figured that we needed her 5-star. As time went on, we slowly noticed that the 4-star and 5-star had a lot in common, that really we didn't need the 5-star too often, mainly because of the amount of over tuning that we did with speed, that it made it a little bit more or less not useful, or at least not needed. In fact, we had a little bit too much speed. It did help us out in at least the defensive, or at least the debuff type category, which was really nice, as well as making the enemy take more damage, but more than less, or at least more often than not, we got everything that we needed from the 4-star. We got an increase in attack, which helped us out in damage wise, and then we also got the debuff inflicting amount that we got from at least getting a certain amount of speed. It applied us the nice speed that we did need, and it could very well stack at the start of the battle as well. So it was very nice to actually have this 4-star weapon. So comparing both the 5-star weapon being Infinite Moment and then the 4-star weapon being Sun Staff, it's definitely better to just stick with the 4-star weapon. You don't really need the 5-star weapon unless we're really early game, which a lot of us went for the 5-star weapon once again but you'd be fine later on with the 4-star weapon, hence the reason she's down here. Now we have the next character that we're going to go over with, and actually I'm going to do 2 at a time here because this is a long list. This would be Mont and of course Yuki. Both of these characters are absolutely amazing here. They actually can help with their 5-star weapon. See, Mont herself is actually a really lackluster character alone. The 5-star weapon actually that she has is not very bad. In fact, it's pretty darn decent. It being there actually does help out the 4-star itself, or at least help out the character itself quite often, seeing that what the 5-star does give you is the critical damage that you do need. It also applies more to the ice crystal stacks that she's able to get, but of course when we compare it to the 4-star, more often than not, you really have the ice crystal stacks, so you already have that increased damage that the 4-star does offer, and it does stack up to 10 times, as well as you have the ice crystal stacks there as well, which is pretty much the same thing the 5-star is giving you. The only difference is we don't get the critical damage increase, which is a little bit sucky there, but we still do get an increase in attack. So I mean, more often, if you can see a little bit of the comparisons, there's not too much of a differ there. As for Yuki herself, Yuki isn't that bad as well. She's kind of in the same boat with her 5-star being pretty darn decent, but at the same time isn't overly needed here. Her 4-star is pretty darn good as well because it increases her defense values by 34.5%, while the 5-star increases it by 45%. That more or less is not too much of a difference here, but the reasoning why it's so close and why we say that the 4-star is a better choice here is mainly because the 4-star actually grants not only the ally a shield, but that's also whenever anyone is lower than 50% health. This shield is mainly going to be her whole deal when it comes down to her whole entire kit, seeing the shield is really a huge deal in general. With this in mind, that shield that it will generate is about 31%, which is really nice. The 5-star itself does increase more of that lovely defense that you do want, but if you're looking at it from a different standpoint, both the defense and the shield kind of go in the same little aspect, so the 4-star weapon isn't all too bad. Hence the reason she's going to be down here as well. Now the next 2 characters that we're going to go ahead and go over, this is going to be of course Riddle and Morgana. Both of these characters are actually pretty decent early game here. The only downside is their weaponry. The weapons aren't really too bad. To be honest, they're actually pretty darn good. For example, Riddle's weapon is pretty darn good as well, increasing her attack by 30% compared to the 4-star, which is of course a 6% downgrade there, but it also helps out more of her kit. But the reason why we don't keep this weapon as like a helpful weapon here is because the 4-star weapon, as long as we're using a skill, which will always happen for our allies, we're getting an attack buff. So that's more or less helping out your team even more so. And this attack buff is a 4.5% for 2 whole turns. Now, it may sound a little bit lackluster, but of course it stacks up to 3 times, which can pretty much equate it up to the 5-star weapon as well. I say the 4-star is more than enough for this character, so any further investment is more likely just for collection purposes and not really needed for later on usage. Currently early game, a lot of people are trying to go for our 5-star weapon if we are utilizing at least hard enough for now, but it's not going to be often that you're going to utilize this. Now for the man Morgana's in that same boat once again here, but the reason why he's in this boat is because of his event weapon. This man has a 4-star event weapon that's pretty darn good, in which we do have a 4-star that's nice for him as well, but the event weapon is what really drove it home. It gives him the critical rate that he was going to be missing if he did not have the event weapon, seeing that the 5-star gives 18% while the 4-star gives 11%. It more or less was really helpful for this very reason here, and it also restores HP much like the 5-star weapon. It helps you out a lot in this aspect, seeing that you're more likely having both of the things inside of a 4-star weapon rather than having to use the gems for that said 5-star weapon. Another good part about this, it does, or at least it can, inflict forget on the target as well, so you do get a little bit of an extra debuff in that aspect as well, instead of having the regular 4-star being Shamshir, which really isn't too good. This 4-star weapon is a little bit mediocre, so if you do have at least the event 4-star weapon being Headhunter Ladle, that's probably going to be the best thing that you can possibly use in case you really just want to actually utilize this character. 5-star weapon is pretty darn decent, but compared to all 3 of them, it's kind of in that bracket that's okay-ish, so you don't really need it. Alright, so now that we've talked about them 2, we're going to go ahead and talk about 2 others, being at least Cherish and Puppet. Both Cherish and Puppet are absolutely amazing here, but more often than not, you don't need either one of their 5-stars. In fact, Puppet specifically, her weapon is much more better, at least I would say way better, to some extent than her 5-star weapon. Unless you're going ahead and duping out the 5-star weapon, I wouldn't see it too needed to actually get it. The main reason for this is because we're increasing our shield and the defense of the shielded allies. So it's kind of going hand in hand with her 4-star weapon rather than the 5-star weapon. 5-star weapon is just mainly allowing her to grant an extra seashell stack while also increasing her attack and defense. Though the attack and defense isn't really all too needed there, at least together wise, seeing that this character is mainly here for at least defensive capabilities and shields, it does increase the defense by at least 45%. But if we go ahead and look at the 4-star reason or the 4-star weapon for Puppet exclusively, you are still getting that 45%. This is going to be the defense of your shielded allies. So you're increasing your defense in general as long as they have shields on by 45%, which you're always going to have a shield on with her. Then of course, if we look at the man Cherish is pretty darn good as well. His 5-star is nice, but is not at least a mandatory thing in all aspects. It's pretty darn good, to be honest. It provides you a 45% defense increase, which is something that the 4-star does not do. But once again, you're usually going to be running Cherish with some other characters here that actually help out his defensive capabilities, hindering this 5-star a little bit more. Now it does of course increase your shield amount based on the amount of stacks of Saint of Honesty, which is always nice to have here, and it also increases your damage bonus. But if you go ahead and look at the 4-star, which is all we really need to look at here, the shield effect increased by the 16.4% of the 4-star weapon. It's actually better than anything. So I mean, like, I feel like a lot of you guys are going to enjoy that more often than not, instead of having to utilize just anything else. So the 4-star weapon is probably the best thing to go for, especially in this aspect of at least things here. So now we've talked through this. First of all, if you've made it this far, be sure to type down below in the comment section #defender to make sure you let me know that you've made it this far so far in the video. But we're gonna go ahead and keep on going. So now we talked about at least them two here, we're going to talk about our last few people, in which I want to say we're just going to add them all at the same time. These guys all have their main reasonings here for at least their weapons. Joker's is mainly because the 5-star and the 4-star do similar things here, so there's no point in actually utilizing the 5-star at that point in time. If you rerolled for it, it's absolutely nice, though it isn't mandatory. Akechi's in this aspect where of course he's also nice to utilize his 5-star weapon, but it isn't really necessary unless you are genuinely getting up the character himself, which that's the only time where the 5-star weapon is truly going to trigger something huge. Then the next two characters, or the next three characters here, I can say is Tomoko, our man, what is it called? Not Seiji again, Sepia, as well as Messa. All three of these guys are absolutely amazing. Well, two of these guys and this one girl here are all absolutely amazing. Just they're not necessary, to be honest. For poor Messa himself, just so people understand why I'm putting Messa this low as well, is because his weapon provides pin on Messa isn't really the best thing. Even in the aspects of just getting to his A3, it isn't the best thing here. So really you can use it just as a meat stick for at least stat points, but more often than not you don't really need it. If it was an attack percentage main stat for at least the weapon, it would be more, at least it would be way better in that aspect. Hence the reason why we have him at least as the 4-star being more than enough. The 4-star is giving you that lovely attack percentage, which we always do prefer, and we do get more attack increase based on the amount of bleeds. While for the 5-star, we're mainly looking at the pierce rate / bleeding amount for damage dealt. So it's still nice, but it isn't fully needed comparing both the 4-star weapons and the 5-star weapons to each other. So I think that's going to really wrap it up for at least the 4-star section of this area. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the helpful section. Now for the helpful section, as we did say earlier, this is more or less going to be some characters that it's pretty nice to have. They're 5 stars, but once again, you don't always need them. They're just helpful to have. First one that we're going to look at is going to be Yusuke. Yusuke is actually amazing with his 5-star weapon, does help out quite a lot with his counters, so I mean it's really decent to have. Now the next character that we're going to end up going for is going to be Ange. Ange more or less does not need her 5-star weapon. It's just really nice to have this one specifically, and the main reason for this is just because the over amount of damage you can get off with this. Ange is quite helpful at the medium game, or at least in game as well, but the fire damage is all we're increasing. It does also help out to have that inflicting burn that she does here, at least have, as well as increase her fire damage overall based on that burning foe. Hence the reason she's in that helpful section. Now the next characters that we're going to be looking at is going to be Luce as well as Riko. Both these characters 5 stars are pretty darn good, but the reason why they're in that helpful section is because of their event weapons. More often than not, both of their event weapons are pretty darn good as well here, and if you go ahead and compare them to their actual 5-star counterparts, it's not going to be too bad. The difference in just main stats, aka the attack percentage for at least our man Luce, for example, is only 6% difference. Not to mention with the actual event weapon, when you look at it here, it's helping out at the EHR stat, which you really do need as well for some of his skills, seeing that you need to proc off as many of those debuffs that he wants to place there, while it also enhances his skill effects by 60%, which is always nice. This is something that you're going to see a little bit more on this 5-star weapon, so it's not going to be too crazy, but it's just helpful to have it in general. The 5-star weapon is actually really helpful with him himself, seeing that overall it's going to be dealing some nice damage dealt increases. Riko's on the other hand here, if we went ahead and actually went for her 5-star weapon as well, it's in a nice little spot where you don't always need it, and this is mainly because of the event weapon that we got, but by having it you do get that nice speed increase, of course, help out every time you knock down your toughness stacks on the enemy, while also providing a nice damage bonus. Now we have the next two characters, which is going to be Marian as well as Soy. Both of these characters are really nice, in fact very nice for both of their 5-star weapons here, and is one of the reasons why they are in the actual helpful section here. For at least our Marian, we can immediately say that for her healing when she does get this weapon is really nice. It increases it by 10%, which is very nice compared to at least the 4-star weapon, while also providing that lovely 30% in max HP. The 4-star weapon is lacking that max HP, hence the reason why the 5-star weapon is a little bit better. And then of course, whenever we do spend our little stacks, we do get party increased damage, hence our reason that she's there. As for the man Soy is really helpful with more of his taunting based with this actual 5-star weapon. The 5-star weapon itself is increasing his HP by 30%, so instead of 24%, and then of course by activating his healing here, he has a 52% chance to then grant that same effect to an ally with the lowest remaining health, allowing you to really keep yourself alive as much as possible. And then whenever you do tank attack, you can then decrease the attacker's defense by 30%. So it's more of a debuffing type tool while also being a lovely tanking tool for everyone around. Really do like this character's weapon, so I think it definitely deserves to be in the helpful section. Then the last three here, which is going to be our girl Scloser, going to be our man Seiji aka Flueret, and then our man Skull. All three of their weapons are really decent, especially for at least damage dealers, and Flueret mainly makes it very noticeable here. The more damage you get off this guy, the more he becomes an actual problem here, and his 5-star compared to his 4-star is a striking difference here. Mainly because the 5-star does increase his crit rate, while the 4-star really doesn't do that. He has more of course stats off the 5-star weapon, builds up more of his stacks in general, and increases his damage with the 5-star, hence the reason it's so helpful. As for at least Scloser and Ryuji here, they're kind of in that same section, in which we can go ahead and take Scloser for an example with it, where the 5-star is very nice and helpful here. It actually increases the blessed damage that you deal by 24%, much like the 4-star that does a 24% increase in attack, but alongside with having this blessed weapon, you're then increasing her midsummer state, which is going to help out her kit overall. It's a really helpful weapon to have, being that it is a DPS weapon here, and it's more often than not going to help you out a lot more than the 4-star weapon will. So I would say the 5-star weapon is kind of needed in this aspect. All right, now we're going to go to the very helpful section. These are going to be the weapons that of course we really do recommend quite a lot, and I feel a lot of you guys should really pay attention to. So with these type of characters that we're going to be talking about here, these are going to go in threes, and I'm going to try and summarize them up as good as possible because man, they're all good for very drastic reasons. So for example, we have at least the characters being Turbo, Haru, as well as Rin or Riko here. All three of these characters are insanely good here, and the reason that we find their weapons as very helpful as they are is because the stats they end up increasing. For example, Turbo really does need a lot of speed. Her weapon in general gives her that speed that she truly does need, and she makes herself very prominent in tons of teams here that this weapon will continue carrying her through and through. Alongside of this, it does increase her attack by at least a whopping 12.5%, which can go to a maximum of 100%, so it does make a huge difference compared to her 4-star weapon. The same can technically be said with Haru, where Haru herself is more than often not needing a ton of EHR. Luckily, since they ended up reworking Haru's whole EHR kit and her whole kit in general, she needs this weapon a little bit less, but you still want to have it. Main reason for this is because it increases her psychic damage by 24%, and every time we do get a modification, which is part of her whole kit, it will increase her attack by 34%, unlike her 4-star, which doesn't do nearly as much of this type of deal, making a huge gap in between the character. Then we have, of course, Riko, who is the other character I want to talk about as well. She's insanely worth it with her 5-star weapon here, which is the reason why we want to have it. And with the 4-star weapon, it doesn't build as much crit damage as we surely do need for this character, who is a crit damage based character. The 5-star does go ahead and build more of this crit damage type aspect and continues to stack it up even with your allies as well, increasing their crit damage as well by 13.2%. Plus, not to mention, you're able to save some SP whenever you're utilizing this, and when you do use that said SP, being around 50 SP, you're also getting yourself a major damage dealt increase. So now we went over those three, let's go ahead and go over the next three immediately here, which is going to be CNY Rin, Makoto, and of course our girl Howler here. So with CNY Rin, Makoto and Howler, they're all going to be characters whose weapons are very much so helpful, but once again not must-have weapons. They're just very much so incentivized. For example, Makoto is one of the newer characters that came out on Global, and I can straight up say right now, her 4-star weapon is not too impressive whatsoever. The 5-star weapon makes a huge difference, increasing the nuclear amount of damage, while also allowing her to increase her attack if there is an elemental ailment on the enemy as well. But alongside of this here, she does do some kit stacking, which is also really nice, and increases her nuclear damage skill the next turn as well, with the crash out status active. So that's already one thing that's a very helpful thing. But if we look at a character like CNY Rin, she does something similar, where the 4-star is really good as well, but the 5-star is just above and beyond. Utilizing the 5-star, you get yourself a lovely attack percent increase there, but you also are increasing the critical rate, which the 4-star just does not do. It also increases your technical damage, which the 4-star also doesn't do, hence the reason for the major gap. 5-star weapon inside of at least this character would definitely be really good for her as well, making a giant difference. As for Howler, Howler makes a giant difference with her 5-star weapon as well, seeing that you have a ton more different little aspects that you normally wouldn't have. These aspects are going to at least go from EHR increasing, but not at least going immediately away from the amount of things that you can do. You're not only helping out your attack overall, or at least your EHR overall, but you then can also take down the target's defense by a major amount, depending if you're using the single target debuff or the AoE debuff, which is just something that the actual 4-star weapon will never ever do, and never ever can make up, or at least make up for with compensation. So the 5-star weapon is definitely way more useful. Then we have the next three characters, which is going to be Leon, Vino, and also Yui. These three characters are absolutely insane, and by having their actual 4-star weapons, or at least their 5-star weapons, you are doing them the greatest service ever. These three immediately, when we go ahead and look at their weapons, are drastically different, because with Leon's one, for example, it mainly only helps out his shield and then some of his allies' attack increase, but it is very specific on what they need to do. While the 5-star isn't as much specifics here, or doesn't have too many specifics here, it increases the attack by 30% instead of a measly 17%, and then also helps you out with other buffs. This also will help you out not only with the attack percentage by a following whopping 16%, but then increase your crit damage by 16%. It also goes more into his kit, seeing that it's based off the power of friendship stacks, which grant even more buffs and increase his shield effect later on. Now, as for the other characters such as like Yui, for example, which we're going to just go ahead and say this one immediately, Yui herself really does make this also very noticeable. And that's mainly because the 4-star weapon for Yui is not as good as the 5-star weapon. If you look at the 4-star weapon, it mainly gives you a 13.9% increase rather than that lovely 18.1% increase, which anyone who has Yui can really verify that this is a major deal. The critical rate increase for this is actually insane, so by having both of them, it'll do you some wonders. Another good thing about this is increasing your follow-up damage is also a major thing with this character, which it increases the damage with the 5-star by 26%. While for the 4-star weapon, you have to make sure you have this as well, which it increases the electric damage by 18.4%, but that's only electric damage. It also only stacks up to 2 whole times, while the 5-star weapon can do this multiple times no matter what. It also activates even more so whenever we have a player 2 status, which is going to be one of the things of her kit that the 4-star just does not actually add on as well. So having the cyber jammers, aka her exclusive weapon, is more than often not going to help you out more than hurt you. So I would definitely advise getting those. Now coming down to our last 4 characters for at least this section, which I'm just going to do all 4 at the same time. That would be Matoi. It's also going to be the 5-star Mont, Sumire, and then Pheobe. Now Pheobe and all of them are absolutely amazing. Their 5-star weapons are insane even. For example, you can do some nice damage with, of course, the 4-star with Sumire here, but when you think about it, that 5-star does a lot of things that the 4-star cannot really do. More than often than not, that's going to be helping you out with the crit damage increase, which the 4-star weapon does not give you. But alongside of this, it is helping her posture stacks, which is a part of her main kit, which increases her actual attack by 21% immediately. It can only stack once, but it makes up for it, seeing that the highlight now can deal further damage increase by 30%. And then even at 2 whole stacks, which is that revival stack that she ends up getting, she's helping herself out even more. The same can be said with the other 3 characters here. They all do have some nice 4-stars, but the reason that it's so different, for example with Pheobe here, is they add on some additionals that are absolutely ones that you don't want to miss out. The 4-star for Pheobe, for example, increases our attack by 24%, as well as the damage dealt by 8% whenever we do consume a cocktail, which gives us a damage dealt increase by 6.3%. While the 5-star weapon itself, not only does it help us out in the damage side with the damage dealt and attack percentage, but it also can trigger some lovely crit rate percentage itself, and also help you get your stacks a lot easier than normal. It also can reduce the chance of the actual preparation time for Pheobe herself. So instead of having to wait 4 turns, sometimes you might need to wait 3. It honestly just depends on if the weapon decides to proc it, and this is a major deal when it comes down to some of the actual rotations that we're doing in different battles, as well in different guild bosses or SOSs. Now I don't need to explain the other 2 because they're somewhat the same way, so you guys might want to go ahead and keep my word on that one. Now going down to the last 3 actual weapons here, these weapons immediately, or not last 3 I guess you say, the last 6 weapons, these are above and beyond, and they're just characters that you really don't want to miss out their weaponry, and that's just because of how busted they really can be. That is going to be Chord, Ange, Futaba, Makoto, Akihiko, and Barry. All 3 of these characters are pretty much like must-have once weapons here. To be honest, I think the only one that really doesn't belong here is kind of like Barry, where it's just very helpful, but I'm just going to keep her in the must-have weapons, and I'm going to explain my reasoning why. Now for Chord, for example, seeing that she is the first one on the list immediately, the reason that her weapon is so much of a must-have is because the overall amount of things that it can do that the 4-star can't do. The 4-star itself does increase your attack, but the 5-star drastically changes the field. It increases your attack not only by 6% more, but you also start with 40% of your highlight energy, and while doing so, you can also get yourself a 15% extra attack increase and some crit rate increase out of this as well. Really does help you out, well, not crit rate increase, but attack increase out of this. With the A1, Chord's also helping you out with crit rate increase, so you're really covering all bases just by getting this 5-star weapon. Then of course, every time we utilize our highlight, we're also increasing our attack by 5%, which can then be stacked 3 whole times, increasing your attack once again by a whopping 15%. Overall, it's about like 60% attack that we're getting increased if we get all the stacks and of course have the weapon. So it's a huge deal, plus the amount of at least highlight energy that we're able to get back so quickly is going to pay off. Hence the reason that she has to be up in the must-have section. Next character being Ange here, I can definitely say that Ange is more or less going to be very helpful. Reasoning for this is just because this character's 5-star weapon is not only really good for the attack side here, but additionally it does help her out in her kit majorly. Instead of her being around in the lower side of things of her kit and not getting some of these extras that the 5-star does have, the 5-star comes with a ton of different extras. One of these is of course increase on attack. The other one is allowing her to additionally gain certain different kit buffs, being at least the listening tone and chance here, and then she's able to increase crit damage stacks with of course her 5-star weapon, increasing it by 15.3%. And then of course the listening tone, if you do have this as well, you're increasing your damage stacks by 0.7, which can stack up to 12 whole times. So if you do the math, it definitely does a lot for at least the user. Then we're going to go ahead and look at Futaba. Now Futaba is another character that absolutely has an insane kit, especially when it comes down to her weapon here. The main reason for it is because of this lovely laptop, which is Hack Specialist. Hack Specialist itself is going to help you out a lot more than her 4-star, seeing that the 4-star really only applies just the damage taken increase and the attack increase side of it. While the 5-star is increasing your attack percentage, it also is increasing the amount of crit damage taken that the enemy can actually get. It also allows you to deal increased 10% extra attack for 2 whole turns whenever a Phantom Thief does deal some weakness damage, which will pretty much always happen when you have Futaba in the team. Overall, you're letting yourself get a ton of different stacks up here for at least your damage, so it more or less speaks for itself. Then we have 2 of the C's members, both Makoto and Akihiko. Makoto, you more or less want this 5-star weapon because of how drastically different the actual stats are to the 4-star weapon. You're increasing your attack by a ton, but you're also allowing yourself to increase your crit rate and more than less your 3G amount by a drastic amount. This isn't something that you're able to of course recover with the 4-star weapon, hence the reason it being up here. As for Akihiko, his is a little bit self-explanatory, seeing that Akihiko is the only character who has a weapon who not only increases crit damage, but also increases its crit rate. Not only this, it also immediately goes into his kit, seeing that his entire kit does need certain tenacity stacks here, and by doing so, he's able to get some extra different effects from his persona skills, 3G skills, and additional effects in general based on the damage that he lands whenever he hits a critical hit. So with this in mind, he is increasing his damage by an extra 34%, so it's something that's just not in the ordinary for 5-star weapons. It's drastically different as well, and the 4-star weapon, if you just wanted to get that for Akihiko, you're missing out on quite a lot. It only helps out his fighting spirit and his attack percentage, so he's missing out not only on the attack percentage side with the 5-star weapon, but the critical damage, the crit rate, and the over kit difference. Lastly, we are talking about Barry here, which Barry is another one of these characters that I did say is more like a must-have weapon. The 4-star weapon is really good for her, but the reason why I say the 5-star is kind of like a must-have weapon itself here is because it does increase her critical rate. With how her DOTs work, the more crit damage and crit rate you got, the better. So of course, this weapon, seeing that it helps out with the crit rate side of things, is really helpful. But alongside of this, if you go ahead and actually cast her 3rd skill, being Shush Execution Time, you're also getting extra crit damage. So more often than not, it kind of helps out with crit rate and crit damage, while also allowing you to get your obsession stacks and more to even deal damage dealt to the enemy. More of this happens, the more stacks you have, the better the damage is going to instantly be, which is something that you're just not going to see from the 4-star weapon. Hence the reason of it being here, but you guys can let me know down below in the comment section how you feel about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please do slap that like button, which forehead, and consider subscribing if you are new. I'll try to make sure this is timed to a certain way, or at least what's it called, time stamped a certain way. But when we started grouping a lot of the characters, how it's going to be is mainly just in groups. I think that's how I'm gonna do it the best way, and you're gonna have to kind of go through each one slightly if they're in between each other a little bit, and I can actually kind of talk about them in that way. Then of course I will have them that way and specified on each character. But it is going to be very hard, because if I didn't start grouping, this was probably going to be an hour-long video, and I'm pretty sure no one would have wanted that. But thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace out.